Hello and welcome to the channel. I'm back with part 2 of the Archon Elemental Swap mini-series. In part 1, I designed Hydra Venti and Dendro Zhongli, and they are now available as prints on my imprint. Zhongli got a few edits to fix some stuff that was bothering me, but it's all pretty minor. If you want to get these, I've left a link in the description. Alright, plugging done. We're back to business. Just as a reminder that Staritsa will not be making an appearance, mostly because she hasn't been released yet. As stated in part 1, we're going by order of appearance, so we're starting with Inazuma is the nation of Electro and Eternity, presided by Raiden Ei, the Raiden Shogun, a role she assumed after the death of the previous Electro Archon, Makoto, her twin sister. A lot of folks in the comments of the first video really wanted Ei to get Pyro, since that would make her the god of war, which would definitely fit, but I had a different idea. One thing I always found really interesting about Ei is the fact that she's kinda bad at her job. Okay, that sounded super mean. What I mean by that is that once she takes over the shogunate, after her sister's death, she kinda spirals into an obsession with eternity and stasis that ends up being pretty detrimental to both her and Inazuma. Her understanding of eternity was never quite as nuanced as her sister's, and it takes her a while to realize that. I wanted to channel all of that by choosing an element that would suit Makoto more than Ei, and so I chose Geo. With it being associated with contracts, the Shogun would be known less for her prowess as a warrior and more for her leadership and possibly for her strategic mind, with her feats of strength being fewer but always bombastic, giving the impression of someone who is generally more pacifist, but when pushed to resort to violence, would not hold back. Basically, in this version, Makoto would have taken center stage a lot more often, with Ei showing up to beat people up when needed. I did also like the idea of this version of Ei being a lot more strategic-minded, so she could also advise Makoto on all manners of things. Now to get all that into a design. The first thing I had in mind for the design was to give Ei a kimono that was more reminiscent of the one we first saw her wearing in Kazuha's retelling of the events in Inazuma before we actually met her. I always liked how flowy it looked, and it was a little closer to the way Makoto wears her kimono. I kept it short with her chest opening because I kept thinking about the whole pulling her sword out of her chest move, before remembering that would not be a thing in this version, since without the whole obsession with eternity, Ei would have no reason to destroy her body and inhabit the Shogun puppet or her sword. So her whole pulling a sword out of my chest move would not be a thing here. I got over that real quick by deciding to give her a full kimono. Since the version of the Shogun Inazuma would have been more used to would have been Makoto, upon her death, Ei simply dressed more like her, forgoing her more battle-ready look, a contrast to her original version, who instead chose to marry both looks. I did a few color passes, deciding fairly early on that she needed a lot of yellow to balance out all that brown. I wasn't entirely sure what to do with her flowers and tested a few things. I really liked the red ones, but I was worried she'd be too reminiscent of Shiori, so I went for yellow. But then my mom, who was visiting that week, said the red looked way better. And who am I to contradict my darling mother, who watches all my videos and is the bestest mom ever? Okay, but for real, shout out to my mom, who was there when I was working on most of the Archon designs and gave me pointers for the colors on Zhongli and Ei's designs. It really helped when I started finalizing their designs. Love you, Mom! Here's the final design for Geo Ei. I gave her 2 red kanzachi and added a blue rope to her obi to add a little splash of color. I did also give her some yellow eyeshadow, mostly for flavor. This time around, I learned from my mistake in the first video and drew out all the patterns for her kimono. I made sure to add some big Geo symbols on her sleeve and also slipped Mount Fuji in there, but let's pretend it's some nondescript mountain. With the design basically decided on, I moved to the thumbnails. For the illustration, I knew I wanted to draw Ei inside her residence in Tenshukaku, holding her spear showcasing her role as the Geo-Archon, but also her literal role as the wise shogun, holding onto her spear, the only thing that makes her Ei and not Makoto. I didn't want it to look sad though. At first, I went with something a little intimidating, with the idea that this was maybe a duel in front of the throne room, but the more I worked on it, the less I liked the idea. The duel idea kind of modeled the initial idea behind the illustration, and it didn't really feel true to what I had in mind for GOA. I did finalize all my colors first, using the Ancient Courtyard Archon Legend event card and the Golden House card as inspiration for the background and colors, although I did go for warmer tones in the end. I decided to go with something more simple, with her just holding her weapon like in my very first sketch. As always, I started with a clean sketch, trying to stick as closely to the TCG style as possible, which was hard. I made her spear a fusion between Ei's signature weapon and Zhongli's, since they're both spear users. Once I was more or less happy with the sketch, I sketched out the background to give future me a base and moved as quickly as possible back to drawing Ei. I really tried to focus on the line weight, and I will say that focus made it harder for me to notice a few anatomy problems. But it was time to draw the background for real. I really struggled, but I decided fairly early I'd be drawing just one side and then copying it and flipping to make things easier for myself, so that was at least a little less work. I had to move a few things around, including Ei, but once I was done, I could finally move to the colors. There's not much to say about this part of the process. It's mostly a lot of copying the references, using a charcoal brush for gradients and textures, and I sort of winged it for the background. So instead, I'll ramble about some ideas for GOA and the puppet. While the original Ei decided to create a puppet to give herself a new body, this version did so in a vain attempt to recreate her sister. She only made 2 attempts. The first one was a failure, coming out too different in appearance. The second one was a perfect physical copy, but too cold and uninterested in human emotions. The first one, she set free, feeling that he was different enough that no one would ever suspect what she'd attempted. And the second one was sealed away, too similar in appearance to her creator to be left to roam, and too powerful to be simply kept hidden. That's how Skamish is still happening in this alternate universe, although maybe he is less mad about his mom. But also, I thought it'd be sick as hell if the puppet was still a boss, but the context was closer to Azha's whole being sealed and being mad about it deal. Okay, where are we in the speed paint? I don't know what to say. Lots of sakura petals flowing around indoors, and lots of little particles. I tried a few different things for the geo trails, and it took a few tries before I was finally satisfied with everything. I added a bit of noise to add some grain to the whole thing, and some chromatic aberration because I love adding chromatic aberration to stuff. And here is GOA. I did go back and edit a few things, like making her hands a little smaller and shortening her right arm. It was bothering me too much not to. I'm really happy with the end result here. I wasn't sure I could pull it off, especially the background, but I'm glad I pushed myself a little. Although I might have used all my creative energy on this one because I struggled a lot for the next Archon. Sumeru is the nation of Dendro and Wisdom, where reside the Dendro Archon, Lesser Lord Kusalani, also known as Nahida, a role she inherited from the previous Archon, Greater Lord Rukadevata. My first idea for Nahida was to make her the Electro Archon. Just like with Vanchi, the idea came to me while thinking about Sumeru rather than her. Sumeru is a nation where knowledge and wisdom rules all. So, with Eternity, the idea was that it was a nation obsessed with its legacy and with existing in perpetuity. In the game, Nahida is locked away by the sage of Sumeru's academia, who rule in her place because they deem her too weak. But with this new version, rather than locking her up, they would actually attempt to force their ideas of what eternity is to them. With her being so close in appearance to the original Archon, they might actually see her as a sort of reincarnation and revere her for it, all the while trying to force her into the same role as her predecessor. She isn't locked up in this reality, but she doesn't feel all that free either. Ugh, that idea was so good. It was cooking so hard. And then I got to the design phase and I just could not make it work. Here's a few designs I did for her. I was trying to make her look like Ruka the Vata before realizing that wouldn't work since she'd also need a rework. I tried a few things, but while I did like some of the designs, I was not feeling it. It was not reading the way I wanted it to read. So after a while, I decided to pivot and chose Anemo instead. Just like with A lot of comments really wanted her to be Anemo because of her caged bird motif. And who am I to contradict my darling viewers who watch all my videos and are the bestest ever? Admittedly, I put a little less thought into her lore here and sorta just jumped into the design. I did a few design passes with a few different ideas, trying to incorporate wings into the design. At some point I did use this specific concept art of her as inspiration for the last design idea, but I still didn't like it. It did give me the idea of keeping her dress flowy, but I ended up staying close to Nahida's original design. Here's the final version. I gave her some slim bracelets rather than the bulkier ones she has. Inspired by some of the Electro designs, I decided to give her dress a long trail shaped like wings rather than the cape. I also decided not to give her ankles any type of jewelry to sort of imply that this version isn't shackled by anyone. I further detailed her dress, adding birds and wing motifs, and it was done. For the illustration, I knew I wanted her to be outdoors, up in the sky, on a swing, with at least one bird in there. Because the swing is such a common way of representing her, I did want to try and make it look as interesting as I could. The first thumbnail I chose ended up not being the one I picked in the end. I felt like it might look too similar to Venti's TCG card, especially since I was using it as inspiration. So I tried the last one I'd drawn, where she has a more front-facing pose. Although you'll see I did change that a bit in the final illustration. Said final illustration was a lot harder than anticipated. I had a hard time getting her face and pose correct during the sketching phase, but I told myself I'd figure it out in the line art, so I added the birds and moved on. Honestly, I should have done an anatomy pass on this one because there were things that looked very flat. I got through most of the line art and I could not deal with how it looked. I was just kind of devastated. Like, all this work and it just wasn't coming together. Anyway, I did an anatomy pass and reworked the stuff that was bothering me. It sounds simple, but I did spiral for a while before thinking of that. I added the swing, trying to give the ropes a wind-like appearance, before moving to the colors. As always, this part is pretty straightforward. Add the colors and the patterns. I sadly don't have any cool lore ideas to share while the speed paint goes on. I will say, I feel like her design does look a lot simpler than I expected. And I was tempted to maybe add more stuff to it. But I resisted the urge and just focused on finishing the illustration. I moved to the background, which wasn't as easy as I expected. I didn't want things to look too empty, so I did try some different effects for the cloud, and really liked how it all looked. I added particles and little feathers here and there, and it was done! Here's Ei and Nahida. Guess what, guys? I did end up editing stuff again. It was the hands again, they were too big, and the eyes, because they just looked odd to me. But enough complaining. I'm very happy with how this came out. I feel like I could have tried to draw her a little more in perspective now that I think about it. But I gotta remember that I drew this one after suffering through drawing A's background heavy one, so I will give past me some slack. And that's 2 more designs done, which leaves Verena and Mawika for the next and last part of the series. Whoa! I wonder what element they'll get! Reminder, you can get these illustrations as prints. Links in the description. Okay, I'm done packing. Please let me know your thoughts about these designs. It's always super fun to read all the comments. Like if you like the video, subscribe if you want to see more stuff from Little Me, and I think that's all. The next video will most likely be print-up redesigns, unless I'm struck by sudden inspiration. And part 3 of this series will be out after that video, whatever it is. Gotta give myself enough time to overthink my Archon designs and draw these illustrations. Okay, I'll let y'all go. Thanks for watching, and see you next time. Bye bye!